In the rugged foothills of Montana's Bitterroot Valley, where ancient pines stand sentinel over forgotten Cold War secrets, America's most elusive intelligence operative is about to turn a simple eviction attempt into a masterclass in psychological warfare. 20 years ago, his shadow operations shaped global politics from Moscow to Beijing, a ghost in the intelligence community who could destabilize entire regimes without leaving a trace. Now he tends to his remote mountain farm, living a quiet life that's about to erupt into chaos when the Blackwater Development Group marks his land for their newest luxury resort. They thought they were pressuring a stubborn old farmer. What they didn't know was that Michael Reeves's peaceful demeanor masked 3 decades of CIA operations that made hardened spies whisper his name in reverence. What's about to unfold in the next 7 days will become a masterclass in counterintelligence, using nothing but his farming equipment, intimate knowledge of human psychology, and skills that once brought down governments. Frost glittered on the split-rail fence as Michael Reeves walked his property line in the pre-dawn darkness. His Belgian Malinois, Atlas, moved silently beside him, the dog's training evident in every calculated step. At 58, Michael still moved with the measured precision of someone who had spent decades ensuring each movement revealed nothing while observing everything. His eyes constantly scanned the tree line, cataloging changes so subtle most would miss them entirely. The first light of dawn revealed fresh tire tracks in the muddy access road, tracks that hadn't been there during last night's final perimeter check. "See them, boy?" Michael murmured, kneeling to examine the impression. Atlas's ears twitched forward, but he maintained his silence, exactly as his specialized training demanded. The tracks were deep, made by heavy luxury vehicles, and they'd stopped just short of his property line. Someone had been studying his farm, and they hadn't wanted to be noticed. Mia McKenzie's pickup truck appeared around the bend, the retired Forest Service ranger pulling to a stop beside him. Her expression was grim as she rolled down her window. "Mike, we need to talk. Harrison's place went dark last night." Michael straightened, brushing dirt from his jeans. "Define dark. No lights, no movement, nothing. But this morning, I saw 3 black SUVs parked in his driveway. Men in expensive suits walking his property like they owned it." She paused, glancing at the tire tracks Michael had been examining. "Just like those tracks right there." "Blackwater Development Group?" Michael asked, though he already knew the answer. He'd been tracking their movement through the valley for months, watching as they systematically acquired property after property. Mia nodded. "They're not even trying to hide it anymore. 6 farms in the last 2 months. They come in with offers, way above market value. Those who take the money disappear quietly. Those who don't..." She let the sentence hang. Michael studied the horizon, his mind already processing multiple scenarios, analyzing patterns, identifying vulnerabilities, old habits from a life he'd left behind, but never truly abandoned. "They've been to see you yet?" "Yesterday, offered 3 times what my place is worth. When I said no, they started talking about how dangerous these mountains can be, how accidents happen." Her knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "Mike, these aren't ordinary developers. There's something wrong about them. The way they move, the way they talk, it's too organized, too practiced. Professional intimidation," Michael agreed, his tactical mind already mapping out the bigger picture. "They're using legitimate business as cover, but their real operation is something else entirely. The property acquisitions follow a pattern. They're creating a corridor." Mia's eyes widened slightly. In her years working with the Forest Service, she'd learned to read between the lines. A corridor for what? That's the question we need to answer. Michael patted the side of her truck. "Keep your eyes open, but don't let them know you're watching. These people, they're used to controlling the narrative. The more ignorant we appear, the more they'll reveal." As Mia drove away, Michael whistled softly to Atlas and headed toward his barn. Inside, beneath the normal farming equipment and feed supplies, lay a hidden cellar he'd installed when he first bought the property. Old habits, his few friends had called it. Michael called it insurance. He lifted the false floor, revealing equipment that would raise serious questions if anyone saw it. High-end surveillance gear, encrypted communication systems, and tools that had once helped him gather intelligence in places where being discovered meant death. He'd hoped never to need them again, but he'd learned long ago that hope was no substitute for preparation. His daughter Rachel appeared in the barn doorway, her movement nearly as silent as his own. She'd grown up understanding that her father's agricultural consulting work often involved very little actual farming. The Hendersons, too? Michael nodded, closing the hidden compartment. Blackwater's moving faster now. They're not just buying land anymore, they're securing territory. Rachel's expression hardened. She'd inherited more than just his eyes. She'd absorbed the ability to see patterns where others saw only chaos. The geological surveys they've been running, the electromagnetic sweeps they claimed were for environmental impact studies. They're looking for something specific, Michael confirmed, something worth burning their legitimate cover for. A vehicle's approach caught their attention. Through the barn window, they watched as 3 black SUVs rolled past their gate, moving, slowly, deliberately. Rachel's hand moved unconsciously to the small of her back, where Michael knew she carried the compact pistol he'd trained her to use since she was old enough to understand its responsibility. Reconnaissance, she observed. They're not even trying to be subtle about it. They don't think they need to be, Michael replied. Not here, not against farmers. His phone buzzed. A text from Tom Cooper, the local sheriff and one of the few people who knew fragments of Michael's real background. Blackwater's moving hard. 9 properties in 8 weeks. FBI won't touch it. Paperwork's too clean. Watch your back. Michael slipped the phone away and moved to his office, pulling out detailed satellite imagery of the valley. His property sat at a crucial junction, controlling access to 3 separate wilderness areas and overlooking the only pass suitable for heavy vehicle traffic. No wonder they wanted it. The day passed with deceptive normalcy as Michael and Rachel went about their usual routines, but there was nothing normal about the way they watched and waited. By sunset, Atlas's warning growl announced what they'd been expecting. "Stay in the house," Michael told Rachel, adjusting his worn work jacket. "Let them think we're simple farmers. Let them underestimate us." It was a mistake his opponents had made throughout his career, one that had often proved fatal. The SUVs stopped at his gate, disgorging 6 men in tailored suits that cost more than most farmers made in a month. Michael counted 4 more staying with the vehicles, their stances and positioning revealing military training. Private security, but with a level of discipline that suggested special operations background. James Morrison led the group, his custom Italian shoes incongruous against the muddy farm road. His smile was practiced, professional, but his eyes held the cold calculation of someone used to wielding power through any means necessary. "Mr. Reeves," Morrison extended his hand. "Beautiful property you have here." His grip was carefully firm, another small dominance play that made Michael's analytical mind catalog and dissect every aspect of the man's practice performance. "What can I do for you, gentlemen?" Michael's voice was friendly, measured, playing the role of a simple farmer while his trained senses noted every detail. 2 men moving toward his barn, trying to be subtle about their reconnaissance. One by the gate with a radio, another running what appeared to be a handheld scanner disguised as a phone. Professional advance team, but they'd grown sloppy, too used to intimidating civilians. Morrison gestured expansively at the valley. "We represent Blackwater Development Group. We've been acquiring properties in this area, creating opportunities for economic growth. Your land has certain features that align with our development plans. Michael leaned against his fence post, the picture of rural relaxation. Inside, he was marking fields of fire, noting cover positions, analyzing their tactical deployment. These weren't ordinary security. Their movement patterns suggested extensive combat experience. Not interested in selling. Land's been in. The family too long. Morrison's smile tightened fractionally. Perhaps I wasn't clear. We're prepared to offer substantially above market value, 5 million cash, more than generous for a farm this size. Michael scratched Atlas behind the ears, buying time to observe the two men by his barn. They were methodically checking site, lines, mapping defensive positions, behaving nothing like real estate developers. Money's not everything. Some things aren't for sale. The friendly facade cracked slightly. Morrison stepped closer, lowering his voice. Mr. Reeves, let me be direct. This valley is changing. Progress, you might say. You can be part of that change and profit from it, or... He let the threat hang in the air. Or... Michael's voice remained calm, even as he noted the subtle shift in the men's positions, surrounding him in a standard intimidation formation. Or you might find these mountains becoming very unwelcoming. Accidents happen, especially to stubborn old men who don't know when to take a good deal. Michael straightened slowly, allowing just a hint of steel to enter his voice. Sounds like a threat, Mr. Morrison. Years of intelligence work had taught him that sometimes the most valuable information came from letting opponents think they'd slipped up. Morrison's eyes narrowed slightly at Michael's shift in demeanor, a subtle tell that registered in Michael's practiced observation. Simply stating facts, the valley is changing. Fighting that change would be unwise. One of the men by the barn called out something about security systems. They'd found the obvious cameras Michael had let them spot, missing the far more sophisticated surveillance network hidden throughout his property. Think about it, Morrison said, producing a business card. You have 48 hours. After that, the offer becomes significantly less generous. Michael took the card, noting the artificial weight of the paper, the subtle watermarks that marked it as part of an elaborate cover identity. I'll sleep on it. See that you do. Morrison turned to leave, then paused. Beautiful dog. Belgian Malinois, yes? Excellent breed. Would be a shame if something happened to him. Atlas growled softly, picking up on Michael's controlled tension. Michael kept his hand gentle on the dog's head, but his voice carried the weight of decades of covert operations. That would be a serious miscalculation. Something in his tone made Morrison hesitate, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. For just a moment, the mask slipped, and Michael saw genuine surprise. They had expected an easy mark, a simple farmer they could bully or buy. Instead, they'd caught a glimpse of something else, something that set off warning bells in trained operators. After the Blackwater team retreated to their vehicles, Rachel emerged from the house, carrying the long-range camera she'd been using to photograph and document everything. Got their faces, license plates, and full biometric markers for facial recognition. Send it through the secure channel to Tom, Michael instructed, already moving toward his command center in the basement. Let's see who these people really are. Inside his house, Michael activated his real security system. Hidden cameras covered every approach, motion sensors monitored the perimeter, and sophisticated signals intelligence equipment intercepted and decoded any communications within a 5-mile radius. It was a setup that would have impressed his former CIA handlers if they knew it existed. He pulled up satellite imagery of the valley, marking known Blackwater acquisitions. 9 properties taken in 2 months, each one strategic. His land was the missing piece, controlling the only viable heavy vehicle access point and providing clear lines of sight across 3 major approach routes. His phone rang. Mia McKenzie, her voice tight with barely controlled fear. Mike, they came back to Harrison's place. Something's happening. Lots of heavy equipment moving in after dark, but they're keeping it under blackout conditions. And there's something else. I think I saw shipping containers being unloaded. Big ones, with some kind of special handling markings. Military spec, Michael replied, checking his surveillance feeds. They're moving faster than expected. Mia, take that vacation you were talking about. Visit your sister in Idaho. Don't tell anyone you're going. You're not running, are you? No, Michael said, watching thermal signatures move through the darkness. Around Harrison's former property. Some lines need to be drawn. Some threats need to be answered. After hanging up, Michael descended into his cellar command center. The hidden room was exactly as he'd left it, equipment maintained and ready. He began checking each piece methodically, muscle memory taking over as he field-stripped and reassembled tools he'd hoped never to need again. Atlas whined softly from above, and moments later, Rachel appeared at the cellar entrance. Dad, we've got movement on the ridge. Multiple heat signatures trying to stay hidden in the tree line. Michael nodded, unsurprised. They're mapping approaches, looking for blind spots. Standard advanced team tactics. How many? 4, moving in pairs. Military precision in their movements. Rachel had grown up learning to spot such details, though Michael had often wished she didn't have to. They'll be testing our security, probing for weaknesses. Michael moved to his surveillance system, adjusting parameters to track the observers. Let them look. They'll find exactly what we want them to find. His phone buzzed, a message from an old contact in federal law enforcement. The data confirmed what Michael had already suspected. Blackwater Development Group was a sophisticated front, its paper trail immaculate but showing telltale signs of artificial aging. Their business operations were legitimate on the surface, but their personnel told a different story. Former military, ex-intelligence operators, private security contractors with specialized skill sets. Rachel checked the deep background on their shell companies. Michael studied thermal images of the observation teams moving through his property's perimeter. Focus on their international operations, especially in regions with rare earth mineral deposits. Rachel's fingers flew across her keyboard. Growing up with a CIA operative for a father had given her skills few people knew existed. Got it. They're running similar operations in 3 other locations. Remote areas, minimal population, all with unusual geological features. And look at this, their environmental impact studies are focused on very specific frequency ranges. They're not looking for building sites, Michael concluded. They're searching for something worth burning multiple cover identities and risking exposure of their entire operation. A vehicle approached on the main road, running dark. Michael checked his cameras, recognizing Sheriff Cooper's truck. The aging lawman had seen enough in his career to know when something wasn't right, and enough wisdom to know when he was outmatched. "Evening, Mike," Cooper said as he stepped out of his vehicle. "Heard you had visitors today. Word travels fast in small towns." Blackwater's delegation, Michael confirmed, making their pitch. Cooper's expression hardened. "Listen, about the others, Miller, Harrison, the Hendersons, we know what happened. We just can't prove anything. These people, they're connected. Evidence disappears, witnesses change their stories, and anyone who pushes too hard finds themselves facing federal investigations into their personal finances." "They're professionals," Michael agreed, "using legitimate business as cover for something else. The question is what?" Cooper hesitated, then reached into his truck, pulling out a file. "Found this in the county archives. Geological survey from the 1960s, classified until last year. The whole valley sits on something unique, some kind of rare earth deposit, but with unusual properties. The kind of thing that would interest people with specialized technical knowledge and unlimited resources." Michael studied the report, his trained mind connecting pieces of a larger puzzle. "They're not just buying land. They're securing access to something they think they've found, something worth burning their covers for." Mike, Cooper said quietly, these aren't ordinary criminals. They've got influence in places that shouldn't be influenced. Fighting them, it's suicide. Appreciate the warning, Tom, but I've spent my life dealing with people who thought they were untouchable. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is let them keep believing it. As Cooper drove away, Michael's phone chimed with an alert from his perimeter sensors. The observation teams were withdrawing, but their patterns suggested they'd be back, better equipped and more prepared. Rachel appeared at his side, holding a tablet displaying thermal images of vehicles moving through the valley under cover of darkness. They're mobilizing, she said quietly. Multiple teams, heavy equipment, and something else. Look at these heat signatures. They're moving in military convoy formation. Michael studied the data, recognizing patterns he'd seen in operations around the world. They're done playing businessmen. Next visit won't be about buying the farm. Rachel's jaw set in a determined line he recognized from her mother. We're not running. No, Michael agreed, watching the thermal signatures move through his valley like predators in the night. We're not running. Sometimes you have to remind people why certain lines shouldn't be crossed, why some quiet places deserve to stay peaceful. Adisi. Night deepened over the Bitterroot Valley as Michael Reeves began preparations for a confrontation he'd spent decades hoping to avoid. But as he'd learned in his years with the CIA, sometimes the best way to prevent a war was to make sure the other side understood exactly what starting one would cost them. Darkness settled over the valley like a heavy blanket, bringing with it an eerie silence that made Atlas's ears twitch constantly. Michael worked methodically in his barn, converting ordinary farming implements into sophisticated surveillance equipment. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, muscle memory from decades of improvising tools in the field taking over. Those cameras they spotted, Rachel said, helping him modify an irrigation control system. You wanted them to find those, didn't you? Michael nodded, hands steady as he worked. People find what they expect to find. They saw obvious security measures, stopped looking for the real ones. A vehicle approached on the access road, running without lights. Atlas's low growl came 3 seconds before the motion sensors triggered. Rachel moved to the barn's shadows, just as Michael had taught her, while he continued working, appearing oblivious to the observers. 2 teams in the tree line, Rachel whispered, using the reflection in the barn window. Military formation, definitely not local. Good eye, Michael replied quietly. What else? 3rd team by the creek bed. They're mapping approaches, documenting blind spots. She paused. They think they're being subtle. Mia's truck appeared suddenly, high beams flooding the area. The hidden observers scattered like shadows in sunlight. She pulled up to the barn, expression grim. Subtle as a freight train, but it got them moving. Ex-military, Michael noted, recognizing their retreat pattern. Probably special operations background, but they've gotten sloppy, too used to operating without real opposition. Mia raised an eyebrow. Been a while since you did pattern analysis. At Langley, some skills you don't forget, Michael replied, continuing his modifications to the farm equipment. Like how you haven't lost your touch at counter-surveillance. Your random patrols aren't so random. Mia pulled out her phone, showing him surveillance photos. 5 more properties sold today. Cash deals way above market value. The holdouts are getting nervous. They should be. This isn't about development anymore. Blackwater's establishing infrastructure. My land's the final piece they need for complete control of the valley's access points. Sheriff Cooper's cruiser rolled up, the aging lawman stepping out looking more tired than usual. Got some news you need to hear, Mike. Mind if we take this inside? In the kitchen, Cooper spread out a map marked with recent property acquisitions. State police picked up chatter. Blackwater isn't just buying farms. They're building something bigger, some kind of research facility, but off any official books. My property controls the only viable access route, Michael finished. High ground, overlooking the main road, clear lines of sight to 3 county highways. Cooper studied him. "You noticed that awful quick for a farmer." "Same way you noticed it awful quick for a small-town sheriff," Michael replied. "Kosovo, 99, Cooper said quietly. "Delta Force." "Langley," Michael responded. "Though these days, I prefer growing corn to running operations." The sheriff's expression hardened. They're not going to take no for an answer. Morrison himself is personally overseeing this operation. Man's got a reputation for solving problems permanently. Atlas's bark interrupted them, sharp and alert. 3 quick sounds. Their code for multiple vehicles approaching. "Back door," Michael ordered quietly. Mia and Cooper slipped out as headlights swept the front of the house. 4 SUVs rolled past, slower than before, making sure they were seen, letting them feel the pressure. After they passed, Rachel studied the tire tracks they left. Different vehicles than before. Heavier, probably armored. Michael nodded. They're done playing developer. Next visit won't be about buying the farm. How long? Mia had returned, moving like the intelligence operative she'd once been. They'll wait for full dark. New moon tonight. Perfect conditions for a show of force. "I'll make some calls," Cooper said. "But don't expect backup. They've got people in the state police, maybe higher." "Won't need backup," Michael replied, moving to the barn. "Just need time." Inside, he activated a series of switches hidden in ordinary farm equipment. Hidden panels slid open, revealing sophisticated surveillance gear, signal interceptors, and counter-surveillance equipment that would make a CIA technical team envious. "All these years," Mia whispered, "you weren't just farming." "Rachel's mother's death wasn't an accident," Michael said quietly. "Cartel hit in Mexico, missed me, got her instead. Been waiting for something like this ever since." Rachel checked her equipment with practiced ease. "They think they're hunting a farmer. Instead, they're walking into a trap 20 years in. The making," Michael replied with absolute certainty. "Mia, get to Idaho. Cooper, get clear of this. What's coming, you don't want official involvement." "Like hell," Mia replied. "I didn't spend 15 years in the field to run from a fight. Besides, your south perimeter has a blind spot. Got a duty," Cooper added. "Might not be able to bring official help, but I know some people. Veterans. Good people who owe me favors." Atlas's ears perked up, catching something they couldn't hear. Michael moved to his surveillance system. Thermal imaging showed vehicles moving on back roads, more than before. Heavy trucks mixed with SUVs. "They're not waiting for dark," Rachel observed. "They're moving now." "Good," Michael replied. "Means they're nervous. Nervous people make mistakes." "How many?" Mia asked, checking her own concealed weapon. "I count 15 vehicles, multiple approach vectors, professional deployment pattern." "That's a lot of hardware for one old farmer," Cooper commented. "That's what they think." Michael began distributing equipment. "Let's show them how wrong they are." The sun was setting behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley. In those shadows, Michael Reeves wasn't a farmer anymore. He was an intelligence operative again. The ghost who had moved silently through the world's shadows, and he was about to remind Blackwater why some quiet places are best left in peace. Rachel's voice crackled through their secured radio network. "Movement on the ridge, 3 teams spreading out. They're using thermal imaging, scanning for defenders." "Let them scan," Michael replied, watching his own thermal feeds. "All they'll see is what we want them to see." "Dad," Rachel's voice carried. "Urgency, you need to see this. The geological survey Cooper brought, I cross-referenced it with Blackwater's shell companies. They're not just looking for rare earth elements. The mineral deposits here have unique electromagnetic properties, the kind that could revolutionize certain types of technology. And be worth billions to the right buyers," Mia added. "No wonder they're willing to burn their covers." Michael watched thermal signatures bloom across his modified tablet. Blackwater's advance teams were moving with military precision, but they were following predictable patterns. Years of intelligence work had taught him that even the best trained operators could be decoded if you knew what to look for. "They're establishing a perimeter," Cooper observed, checking his rifle. "Standard tactical doctrine for a forceful takeover." "Standard," Michael agreed, "which means predictable. Maya, status on their communications? Encrypted, military grade. But," she smiled slightly, "I didn't spend all those years at the agency for nothing. They're using short-range tactical frequencies. Very professional, very secure, and very vulnerable to the right kind of interference," Rachel finished, fingers flying across her keyboard. "Especially when you've had 20 years to prepare." The battlefield. Atlas's ears twitched as the first teams reached the outer perimeter of the farm. Michael watched through his surveillance network as they moved through his carefully prepared killing ground, each step bringing them deeper into a trap 2 decades in the making. "Sir," one of them reported in Spanish, not realizing their communications were compromised. "No movement. Thermal shows the house is cold. They might have run." Morrison's voice replied, the arrogance clear even through encryption. "The old man's too stubborn to run. Find him. Show him what happens to people who don't understand progress." Mia's voice was barely a whisper in their tactical communications. "2-man team approaching my position. They're good. I almost didn't spot them." "Your call," Michael replied, monitoring multiple surveillance feeds simultaneously. "Just remember, we need them functional." "Copy that," came Mia's response, followed by 2 quiet thumps in the darkness. "Targets disabled, non-lethal takedowns complete, though I still think we're being too gentle." The Blackwater tactical team split up, covering more ground, falling perfectly into the trap Michael had spent years preparing. He'd devoted decades to studying military tactics, knowing that someday he'd need to counter them. Every apparent advantage they found was carefully crafted deception. "Movement at the house," Rachel reported from her observation post. "They're starting their sweep." Michael watched through his thermal scope as 4 operators stacked up on his front door. Their technique was solid, but they'd made one critical assumption. They thought they were dealing with civilians. "Execute," Michael commanded. Multiple events triggered simultaneously. The front porch lights blazed to life, temporarily blinding anyone wearing night vision equipment. Atlas's bark echoed from 3 different pre-recorded positions, disorienting the assault team. The simple pressure plate they'd stepped on activated a specialized sprinkler system, not with water, but with a compound that rendered thermal imaging useless. Confusion erupted as their tactical advantages disappeared. "We're blind!" one shouted. "Night vision's compromised!" That's when Michael moved. 20 years of CIA operations combined with intimate knowledge of his property made him virtually invisible. The first 2 operators went down before they realized they were under attack. The third managed to raise his weapon, but found himself disarmed by a series of strikes too fast to counter. The 4th tried to radio for help, but discovered their communications were being jammed. "South Team report." Morrison's voice crackled through their captured radios. "Alpha Team respond." "They're good," Cooper observed, watching through his scope as another team rushed to investigate. "But they're fighting blind while we own the night." Mia's voice came through their secure channel. "Technical vehicle approaching fast. Gun truck, heavy weapons mounted." "Right on schedule," Michael replied. "Rachel?" The gun truck roared up the main drive, its mounted heavy weapon ready to provide overwhelming fire support. But as it reached the predetermined point, Rachel activated her father's trap. The modified irrigation system turned the packed earth into mud, bogging down the heavy vehicle. Its momentum carried it forward into a concealed cable that Michael had stretched across the road at engine height. The truck's engine died with a grinding shriek, its lights failing, plunging the disoriented crew into darkness. They never saw Michael approach, never had a chance to use their impressive weapon. 12 down, he reported calmly. Non-lethal takedowns confirmed. But Michael, Mia's voice was tense, thermal imaging shows a lot more movement in the valley. Morrison doesn't take failure well. A new voice cut through their compromised communications. Calm and cultured, but carrying absolute authority. Enough games. This is Morrison speaking. Whoever you are, you've impressed me. Most men would have broken by now, but you've just made a very serious mistake. No one defies my organization and lives to benefit from it. Looking forward to meeting. You, Michael replied, letting them hear him for the first time. Been a while since I had a proper challenge. Silence filled the radio waves, then Morrison's voice returned, showing the first hints of uncertainty. Who are you? Just a farmer protecting his land. Michael's voice carried 3 decades of covert operations experience. Though I should warn you, farming's my second career. You might want to ask your men about my first one, the ones who are still conscious. Anyway, the radio went dead. In the distance, more vehicles were approaching, many more. They're mobilizing everything, Mia reported. Thermal signatures all over the valley. This was just the first wave. The real fight's about to start. Good, Michael replied, checking his equipment. Means they're taking us seriously now. Rachel, activate countermeasures phase 2. Mia, fall back to secondary positions. Cooper, your people ready? Got 8 combat vets moving into position. Good men, saw action in Afghanistan and Iraq. They know what they're doing. Tell them to stay sharp. These Blackwater operators are professionals, ex-military, probably special operations background. They won't make the same mistakes twice. Atlas's bark signaled more approaching vehicles. The night was about to get very interesting. Dad, Rachel's voice was steady. That speech about being a farmer. Think they got the message? Michael smiled, grimly in the darkness. They will by morning. They'll understand exactly why some old operatives never really retire. The real battle was about to begin, but Michael had spent 20 years preparing for this night. Blackwater was about to learn that sometimes the deadliest predators are the ones that don't look threatening until it's too late. Morrison's main force arrived with all the subtlety of an invasion. Headlights cut through the darkness as a convoy of vehicles approached from multiple directions. No more subtle infiltration. This was a show of force designed to overwhelm through superior numbers. I count 20 vehicles, Mia reported from her observation post. Mixed force, gun trucks, tactical SUVs, some with improvised armor. These aren't ordinary security teams anymore. This is a military-style assault force. Michael watched through his thermal scope as the vehicles deployed in a professional combat formation. Morrison's not taking chances anymore. That's a proper and tactical spread. He's got someone advising him who knows modern combat operations. Multiple teams dismounting. Rachel's voice remained cool and professional. They're setting up heavy weapons, 50 cals, maybe something bigger. Got at least 4 sniper teams moving to high ground. Cooper whistled softly. This isn't a security operation anymore. This is a small army. Good, Michael replied, checking his equipment one final time. Means they're done underestimating us. Maya, status on their communications? Intercepted their tactical frequencies. They're using encrypted channels, military grade. But she paused, satisfaction entering her voice. 20 years at the CIA taught me a few tricks. They've got about 80 operators split into fire teams. Morrison's coordinating from a command vehicle at the rear staging area. A new voice cut through their radio network, cultured and commanding, but carrying an edge of controlled fury. Attention, Mr. Reeves. This is your final opportunity. You've impressed me with your initial defense, but surely you can see the futility of resistance now. Surrender and I'll ensure your death is quick. Continue this foolishness, and I'll make an example of you that will be remembered for generations. Michael keyed his radio. Impressive speech, but you made one serious mistake. And what's that? Morrison's voice carried dangerous amusement. "You brought exactly the force I've spent 20 years preparing to fight." The night exploded into action. Morrison's forces advanced with professional precision, using textbook small unit tactics. But Michael had spent decades studying how to counter exactly these methods. The first team hit Michael's initial defensive line, where modified farming equipment strategically placed channeled their approach into predetermined kill zones. When they tried to call in their positions, they found their communications inexplicably garbled. "Nice jamming equipment," Cooper commented to Rachel. "Your father had you install it years ago. The best part is they can only communicate on the frequencies we want them to use," Rachel explained, monitoring multiple feeds. "Everything else just disappears." Blackwater's night vision equipment, top-of-the-line military surplus, suddenly became a liability as Michael triggered arrays of infrared strobes hidden throughout the property. Their careful formation dissolved into chaos as coordinated teams found themselves fighting blind. "Contact front!" a Blackwater operator screamed in Spanish. "They're everywhere!" They weren't, of course, but Michael had mastered the art of asymmetric warfare, using every advantage of terrain and preparation to make his small force seem omnipresent. Atlas's barking came from multiple directions, a combination of the actual dog and pre-recorded sounds played through hidden speakers. The psychological impact was devastating. Trained operators found themselves jumping at shadows, unable to trust their senses. "Western team is pulling back," Cooper reported. "They're trying to regroup by the old tractor." "Perfect," Michael replied. The tractor's seemingly random position was anything but random. When the Blackwater team used it for cover, they found themselves perfectly silhouetted against Michael's prepared backdrop. The night was punctuated by the sharp crack of Cooper's rifle. 3 quick shots, 3 operators down, their weapons flying from numbed hands as non-lethal rounds found exposed pressure points. "God damn," Cooper muttered. "You really did think of everything." Mia's voice cut in, urgent but controlled. "Heavy weapons team setting up by the South Ridge. They've got something bigger than a 50 cal. "Armored vehicle approaching," Rachel added. "Looks like a modified Humvee military surplus. Heavy plating." Morrison's voice crackled through their captured communications. "Enough games. Level the house. Burn everything." The Humvee's engine roared as it charged forward, its heavy weapon preparing to tear Michael's defenses apart. But this too had been anticipated. "Rachel, initiate avalanche protocol." His daughter's fingers flew across her control panel. The irrigation system, modified far beyond its original purpose, activated, but instead of water, it pumped a specially formulated mixture into prepared ground. The Humvee's charge suddenly bogged down as the earth beneath its wheels turned to soup. Its momentum carried it forward into a prepared depression that even its armor couldn't overcome. "Vehicle disabled," Rachel reported calmly. "Crew is bailing out. They never made it." Atlas burst from the darkness like a ghost, years of specialized training evident in every movement. The dog didn't attack. He didn't need to. His precise positioning and aggressive stance gave Michael the seconds he needed to neutralize the crew with non-lethal shots. "What kind of farmer are you?" Morrison's voice carried both rage and growing fear. "The kind who had 20 years to prepare for tonight," Michael replied, moving like a shadow through his carefully prepared battlefield. "The kind who knew eventually someone like you would come. The kind who decided that this land would never fall to men like you." The Blackwater forces were now caught in a nightmare. Every move they made seemed to play into Michael's hands. When they tried to advance, hidden obstacles appeared. When they retreated, they found their escape routes cut off. When they called for support, their communications failed. "Sir," one of Morrison's commanders reported, voice tight with strain, "we're taking heavy casualties, non-lethal rounds but precision shots. Whoever these people are, they're professionals." This is impossible, Morrison raged. No farmer has this kind of capability. No one man could do this. That's where you're wrong, Michael replied, letting his voice carry across their command net. A farmer knows his land. A farmer plans for every season, prepares for every threat. And some farmers have very interesting backgrounds. Mia's voice cut in on their private channel. Michael, they're pulling back, regrouping, but there's something else. Thermal showing new signatures approaching from the south. A lot of them. Good, Michael replied. Means Morrison's called in his reserves. Time to show them why that's exactly what we wanted them to do. The real battle was just beginning, but already the Blackwater forces had learned a crucial lesson. Sometimes the deadliest weapon isn't the one you can see. Sometimes it's the quiet man who spent 20 years preparing for one night of warfare. Morrison's reserves poured into the valley like a dark tide, vehicle headlights cutting through the night as they approached from multiple directions. These weren't just reinforcements, this was a complete tactical overhaul. 5 technical vehicles with mounted weapons, Mia reported, her voice tense. Plus, are those APCs. Mexican military surplus, Cooper confirmed through his scope. Probably disappeared from a base near the border. Heavily modified, extra armor plating. They're done playing games. Michael watched the new forces deploy through his thermal imaging. Their movement was different now, more aggressive, more confident. These weren't the same operators they'd been fighting. These were elite units kept in reserve for situations that required absolute force. I count 50+ new hostiles. Rachel's voice remained steady. Different equipment loadout, better gear, better tactical formation. These guys are pros. Private military contractors, Mia added, monitoring their communications. Grupo Especialista, they're Morrison's personal combat unit. The radio crackled with Morrison's voice, all pretense of civility gone. I don't know who you are, Mr. Reeves, but you forced my hand. These men have toppled governments, they've broken armies, and now they're going to tear your farm apart piece by piece. Michael keyed his radio. Interesting choice. Bringing in military hardware, almost like you're preparing for a military opponent. No more games, Morrison snarled. No more tricks. Pure force, overwhelming and absolute. You still don't understand what you're dealing with, Michael replied calmly. But you're about to. The APCs led the advance, their heavy armor making them seemingly invulnerable to the tricks that had stopped the early forces. Behind them, elite strike teams moved in practiced formation, covering every angle of approach. They're pushing hard, Cooper warned. My guys can't hold the South Ridge much longer. They don't need to, Michael replied. Let them think they're winning. Rachel ready. The APCs reached the first barn, their commanders confident in their armored protection. That's when Rachel activated her father's latest surprise. Modified. Farming equipment, carefully positioned, sprang to life. Irrigation pipes, previously hidden, suddenly pivoted and sprayed the vehicles with a specialized compound. What is this? One of the APC commanders shouted. Some kind of smoke screen. Better, Rachel replied on their command frequency. That compound is rapidly hardening epoxy resin. Your air intakes are now completely sealed. Those fancy vehicles are just very, very expensive roadblocks. The APC's engines died simultaneously, transforming from mobile strong points into improvised obstacles. The elite teams behind them found their careful formation broken, forced to maneuver around their own stalled vehicles. Now, Michael commanded. Atlas's bark echoed through hidden speakers across the property, but this time it was different. A specific pattern that Cooper's veterans recognized instantly. They opened fire from concealed positions, their shots precise and coordinated, not killing but disabling with ruthless efficiency. They're hurting us, someone shouted in Spanish. Every route we take leads into another trap. Mia's voice carried satisfaction. Thermal shows them clustering exactly where we want them. They think they're finding cover, but they're actually moving into our primary kill zone. Time to show them why you don't bring military hardware to a farmer's fight, Michael finished. The ground beneath the private military contractors suddenly transformed. Hidden plates shifted, trenches appeared where solid ground had been, and carefully prepared positions became death traps. Years of farming experience had taught Michael how to shape the land itself into a weapon. Impossible! Morrison's voice cracked with rage. No one could prepare defenses this extensive. 20 years, Michael replied calmly. 20 years of planning, building, preparing. While you saw a simple farm, I was creating something else entirely. The elite forces found themselves in chaos. Their military training worked against them, making them seek conventional cover that turned out to be carefully crafted killing grounds. Every tactic they attempted had been anticipated and countered. West team is cut off, Rachel reported. North team trying to flank, but they've hit the secondary barrier system. They're completely divided now. Mia's voice carried urgent warning. Michael, Morrison's changing tactics. Thermal shows their heavy weapons teams repositioning. They're going to try to level everything. Let them try, Michael replied. Rachel, initiate prairie fire. His daughter's fingers flew across her control panel. Across the property, hidden systems activated. The ground itself seemed to come alive as years of preparation revealed their true purpose. My God, Cooper whispered. The whole property. It's one giant kill zone. Not just a kill zone, Michael corrected. It's a message. Rachel, show them why you don't threaten a farmer who spent 20 years in intelligence operations. The night erupted into carefully orchestrated chaos. Every piece of farm equipment, every structure, every seemingly innocent feature of the landscape suddenly revealed its hidden purpose. The elite forces found themselves fighting not just defenders, but the land itself. Pull back, Morrison screamed. Full retreat. Get out of there. But retreat was no longer an option. Michael had spent 2 decades preparing for this exact scenario, turning 300 acres into the most sophisticated defensive position this side of the Continental Divide. Sir, Mia called urgently, you need to see this. They're bringing in something big, really big. Through his thermal scope, Michael watched as new signatures appeared on the horizon. Morrison was committing everything now, bringing in hardware that would make even military commanders pause. Good, Michael replied, checking his equipment. Means they're desperate, and desperate men make mistakes. Rachel, prepare final contingencies. Mia, activate the secondary network. It's time to show them what this farm can really do. The earth trembled as Morrison's heavy reinforcements approached. Through the darkness came the unmistakable sound of serious military hardware, the deep rumble of armored vehicles that had no business being in civilian hands. Multiple heavy vehicles, Mia reported, her voice tight. At least 3 modified Humvees with heavy weapons and... Is that a light tank? Levy 25, Cooper confirmed grimly. Military surplus, heavily modified. Shouldn't even be possible for them to have that kind of hardware. Michael watched through his thermal imaging as the new forces deployed. The Levy 25 took point, its 25mm chain gun capable of turning buildings to splinters. Behind it, the Humvees spread out in textbook combat formation, their crews moving with practiced precision. These aren't security contractors anymore, Rachel observed from her command station. These are military professionals. Their movement patterns, their equipment handling, everything screams special operations training. Morrison's voice cut through their communications, cold and precise. I hope you're watching, Mr. Reeves. Do you see what you forced me to bring to your little farm? That armor could level a military base. Your tricks and traps won't save you now. Interesting equipment, Michael replied calmly. Almost like you're expecting to fight someone with military experience. No more games, Morrison snarled. No more clever ambushes. Raw firepower will settle this now. The LAV-25's engine roared as it began its advance. Behind it, the elite strike teams moved forward, using the vehicle as mobile cover. Their confidence was evident in every movement. They thought the armor made them invincible. "Dad!" Rachel's voice was steady. "They're moving exactly where we predicted." "Of course they are," Michael replied. "Military training makes them predictable. They're following standard armored assault protocols. Monitoring their communications," Mia added. "They're coordinating a three-pronged attack. Main thrust with the LAV, flanking elements with the Humvees. They think they've got us surrounded." The LAV's chain gun opened up, its heavy rounds tearing through the barn like it was paper. The sound was devastating, designed to break any resistance. Through sheer intimidation. "Keep falling back," Michael ordered. "Make them think it's working." Cooper's veterans executed a fighting retreat, making each withdrawal look desperate and unplanned. The Blackwater forces pressed their advantage, exactly as Michael had anticipated. "They're passing the first marker," Rachel reported. "Moving into primary engagement zone." "Echo dark," Michael commanded. Atlas disappeared into the shadows, understanding his role in what was coming. The Lavi reached the central courtyard, its crew confident in their armored supremacy. That's when Michael revealed the true sophistication of his defenses. "Rachel, initiate thunderstorm protocol." His daughter's hands flew across her control panel. Suddenly, hidden plates in the ground shifted. The lav's weight, which had seemed like an advantage, became its downfall. The ground beneath it wasn't ground at all, but a carefully constructed plate system. "What's happening?" the Levy commander shouted as his vehicle suddenly tilted, its tracks losing grip on the now-moving surface. "Fun fact about farmers," Michael broadcast on their frequency. "We spend a lot of time thinking about how to move heavy equipment." The LAV slid sideways, its crew powerless to prevent it, into a prepared containment area. Its gun, which had seemed so threatening, was now pointed uselessly at the sky. "Kill zone is hot," Mia reported. "Secondary teams are reacting exactly as predicted." The Humvees rushed forward to support their trapped armor, falling perfectly into Michael's next trap. Rachel activated another system, and suddenly the vehicle's electronics went haywire. Custom-built EMP devices, disguised as ordinary farm equipment, rendered their advanced systems useless. "How is this possible?" Morrison demanded, his voice losing its composure. "What kind of farmer has EMP technology?" "The kind who spent 20 years preparing for this exact scenario," Michael replied. "The kind who knew eventually someone would bring military hardware to a farm fight." The elite strike teams found themselves in chaos. Their armored support was neutralized, their communications were compromised, and their night vision equipment was worse than useless in the face of Michael's countermeasures. Atlas's bark echoed from multiple directions at once, the sound amplified and distorted by hidden speakers. The psychological impact was devastating. Even hardened special operations operators found themselves jumping at shadows. "Sir," one of Morrison's commanders reported, panic evident in his voice, "we've lost contact with the LAV. Humvees are dark. Our elite teams are reporting. They're reporting ghosts in the darkness." "Not ghosts," Michael corrected, letting them hear him. "Just one ghost, and you're in his killing ground now." Mia's voice cut in urgently on their private channel. "Michael, thermal shows Morrison mobilizing everything he has left. And there's something else, something bigger coming." "Good," Michael replied, checking his equipment. "Means he's desperate enough to commit his final reserves." "Rachel, prepare the last contingency. Cooper, get your men to secondary positions. Mia, activate the deep surveillance network." "What are you thinking?" Cooper asked. "I'm thinking it's time to show them why some old operatives are best left alone." Michael moved through the darkness like a shadow. Morrison thought he was escalating this fight. Instead, he's walking into the endgame I've been setting up for 20 years. The night air crackled with tension as a new convoy approached the farm. Unlike the previous forces, these vehicles moved with perfect precision, a level of discipline that spoke of something beyond private military contractor training. Formations different, Mia noted, watching through her thermal scope. 5 vehicle, diamond pattern, advanced security protocol. Whoever's in that center vehicle is high value. Morrison, Michael confirmed. He's coming to handle this personally. The convoy halted just beyond the farm's perimeter. When the center vehicle's door opened, even the air seemed to grow colder. Morrison stepped out, his bearing military rather than criminal. He surveyed the battlefield with cold calculation, taking in the disabled LAV, the useless Humvees, his scattered forces. Impressive work, Mr. Reeves, his voice carried across their captured frequencies. Or should I say, Spectre? Yes, I know who you are now. Took some deep digging, calling in serious favors. 20 years ago, you were a legend in certain circles. The shadow that dismantled entire networks without leaving a trace. You've done your homework, Michael replied calmly. Then you know what happens next. Morrison's laugh was chilling. Because we've met before, haven't we? Tehran, 2005. You were hunting terror cells. I was still with Special Forces there as an observer. I saw what you did to those networks. How you turned their own infrastructure against them. Rachel's voice cut in on their private channel. Dad, is he telling the truth? Part of it, Michael confirmed. He's leaving out the part where he was already working for private interests, using his military position to gather intelligence. Morrison was still speaking. I learned valuable lessons watching you work. Been waiting 20 years to test them. When I learned this farm belonged to you, well, let's say this became personal. You should have learned better lessons, Michael replied. Likewise, some ghosts are best left alone. Perhaps, but I brought something special just for you. Morrison gestured and his men began unloading equipment from the convoy. Remember that night in Tehran when you trapped my employers in their own compound? I've spent 20 years perfecting countermeasures to your tactics. Mia's voice was urgent. Michael, they're deploying some kind of advanced electronic warfare suite, military grade, latest generation. They think they can shut down our systems. Let them try, Michael smiled grimly. 20 years is a long time to prepare surprises. Morrison's men worked with practiced efficiency, setting up their equipment. Lights flickered across the farm as their systems attempted to seize control of the infrastructure. Your daughter's quite talented with electronics, Morrison noted. Those were impressive defenses, but now they're mine. Suddenly, every light on the farm went dark. The humming of equipment died. Total darkness fell. You forget something crucial. Michael's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. About fighting ghosts, we prefer the dark. The attack came from multiple directions at once. Atlas's bark triggered a cascade of responses. Cooper's veterans, using routes only they knew, struck with precise coordination. The farm's defensive systems, far from being disabled, revealed new layers of sophistication. Impossible, one of Morrison's tech specialists shouted. Their systems aren't networked. Each defensive position is independent, running on isolated power. 20 years, Michael replied calmly. 20 years to think about every contingency, to build redundancy into redundancy, to create a defensive network that can't be hacked because it's not just technology, it's part of the land itself. Morrison's elite forces found themselves fighting blind. Their electronic warfare suite, which had cost millions to develop, was useless against defenses that blended high-tech sophistication with primitive simplicity. Fall back, Morrison ordered. Regroup. His words cut off as the ground beneath his feet shifted. Hidden mechanisms powered by water pressure and gravity transformed the battlefield. The carefully prepared killing ground revealed its final form. Sir, Mia reported with satisfaction. They're completely surrounded. Every escape route is cut off. Their communications are isolated. Then, Michael's voice carried across the darkness. Let's talk about why you really came here. About the real reason you've been buying up farms in this valley. Morrison's laugh was strained. You think this is about development, about territory? No, old ghost. This is about something much bigger, something that would make even you pause. I know exactly what it's about, Michael replied. Mia's CIA contacts were very thorough. You're not just building infrastructure. You're creating a private military staging ground, and my farm was the last piece you needed. Then you know why I can't leave without it, Morrison replied, his voice carrying deadly certainty. Why, I'll burn everything to the ground if I have to. Atlas's bark cut through the night, a specific pattern that made Morrison's head snap up in recognition. That signal, he whispered. That's a CIA alert. Pattern. The night erupted into precise, coordinated chaos. Morrison was about to learn that some old operatives don't just remember their skills. They spend 20 years perfecting them. The farm had become a war zone, but not the kind his forces were trained to fight. Every shadow concealed a threat. Every piece of equipment masked a tactical advantage, and the very ground beneath their feet seemed to have turned against them. We must admit, Morrison's voice carried a hint of genuine admiration. Turning your irrigation system into a tactical defense grid, brilliant. Using the barn support beams as improvised tank traps, inspired. But you've overlooked one critical detail. And what's that? Michael asked, moving like a ghost through his carefully prepared killing ground. You're still thinking like an operative, tactical, strategic, intelligence-based. But I've evolved beyond that. The private sector taught me something the CIA never could. Sometimes the best weapon is pure, unrestrained force. Mia's voice cut in urgently on their private channel. Michael, thermal shows multiple heat signatures at the perimeter. They're bringing in something new. Not new, Rachel corrected, monitoring her sensors. Those are demolition charges, military grade. They're going to try to level everything. Morrison's laugh was cold. You see, no more clever tactics, no more cat and mouse. If we can't have this land, no one will. Typical, Michael replied calmly. When skill fails, resort to brute force. But you're forgetting something important about farmers. And what's that? We don't just work the land. We understand it. Rachel, show them why. His daughter's fingers flew across her control panel. Suddenly, the demolition teams found their charges sinking into the ground, disappearing into seemingly solid earth. What is this? Morrison demanded. Unstable soil zones, Michael explained, carefully prepared over years. Add a bit of targeted irrigation and the ground becomes quicksand. Your explosives are now buried 20 feet deep. Should be interesting when they detonate. The explosion, when it came, was muffled by earth. Instead of destroying the farm, it created a shockwave that triggered Michael's next layer of defenses. "Sir," one of Morrison's men shouted, "the vibrations! They're activating something!" Hidden mechanisms powered by the explosive force itself transformed the battlefield. Trenches appeared where there had been solid ground. Cover positions shifted. The entire landscape seemed to come alive. "You know what your real mistake was?" Michael's voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Thinking you were fighting. One man, you're not. You're fighting this land itself. Every acre, every feature, every contour, it's all part of the defense. Cooper's veterans struck from concealed positions, their movements coordinated with the changing terrain. Atlas's bark echoed from multiple directions, creating confusion and chaos among Morrison's forces. "Grace," Michael commanded, "execute phase echo." The former CIA operative triggered a sequence she'd helped design. Suddenly, Morrison's command vehicle lost power. Their sophisticated communications gear went dark. They were cut off, isolated, their technological advantages neutralized. "Impressive toys," Morrison snarled. "But I still have 30 elite operators, and we can do this the old-fashioned way." "Can you?" Michael asked quietly. "Look around. Really look. What do you see?" Morrison's forces were scattered, divided by terrain they couldn't trust, fighting an enemy they couldn't find. Their training worked against them. Every instinct told them to seek cover, but the cover itself was part of Michael's trap. "Dad," Rachel's voice was urgent. "They're adapting, switching to small unit tactics, trying to counter our terrain advantage." "Let them," Michael replied. "They're exactly where we want them." "They've split into fire teams," Mia confirmed. moving into secondary kill zones now. Morrison must have realized something was wrong. "Fall back," he ordered. "Regroup at the..." His words cut off as Atlas burst from the darkness, not attacking but executing a precise military maneuver. The dog's movement triggered a sequence of responses, hidden barriers appearing, paths closing, options disappearing. "You know what your men's training is telling them right now?" Michael asked conversationally. "It's telling them to fall back, to high ground, to establish overlapping fields of fire, standard tactical doctrine. And," Morrison's voice was tight with tension, "and that's exactly what we planned for. Rachel, the high ground transformed. What had seemed like tactical advantages became death traps. Morrison's elite forces found themselves channeled into precisely prepared killing zones." "Enough," Morrison shouted. "I won't be beaten by a farmer." "That's your final mistake," Michael replied as he emerged from the shadows, every movement demonstrating decades of intelligence experience. "Thinking I'm just a farmer? I'm something far more dangerous than that." "And what's that?" "I'm a ghost who learned to farm, who spent 20 years turning this land into a weapon, and you just walked right into my killing ground." The night erupted into its final phase. Morrison was about to learn why some quiet men are best left in peace, and why assuming a farmer is defenseless can be the last mistake you ever make. Through his thermal imaging, Michael watched as Morrison's remaining forces tried to establish defensive positions, but every position they chose had been prepared. Every advantage they sought became a liability. "Your mistake," Michael continued, his voice carrying across the battlefield, "was thinking technology and force could overcome. Preparation and patience. 20 years, Morrison. 20 years of planning, of building, of waiting. Every tree, every rock, every seemingly random piece of farm equipment. It's all part of the trap." "Sir," one of Morrison's commanders reported, "we're losing cohesion. The ground keeps shifting. Cover positions disappear as soon as we occupy them. It's like the whole farm is alive." "Because it is," Michael replied. "Rachel, initiate final protocol. The farm's most sophisticated defenses activated, systems that had waited years for this moment revealing their true purpose." Morrison watched, in growing horror, as his carefully planned assault dissolved into chaos. "You want to know the real difference between us?" Michael asked, moving through the darkness with deadly precision. "You spent 20 years building an empire. I spent 20 years preparing to stop men like you, and that's why you never had a chance." The night had reached its turning point. Morrison stood in the center of his trapped forces, his carefully maintained facade of civilized control finally cracking. 2 decades of military training emerged as he shed his business suit jacket, revealing combat gear underneath. "You think you know warfare?" Morrison's voice carried genuine anger now. "I've spent 20 years building a private army, breaking governments, buying generals, turning military units into my personal force. You're not the only one who's been preparing." "Difference is," Michael replied from the darkness, "I wasn't preparing for an empire, just preparing to stop men like you." Morrison's laugh was harsh, still thinking too small. "This valley isn't just about development, it's about creating a forward operating base, a staging ground for something bigger than you can imagine." "Mia," Michael queried on their private channel, "accessing his command vehicle's data now?" "My God, Michael," she replied, "this goes deeper than we thought. They're planning a full military operation, using this valley as a springboard to control the entire region." "Figured it was." "Something like that," Michael replied. "The farm's strategic position, the infrastructure they've been building, this was never about development. It was about creating a private army." Morrison's forces had regrouped, forming a defensive circle around their leader. These weren't security contractors anymore. Their movement showed their true nature as elite military operators. "Sophie, status?" Michael asked. "They're good," his daughter replied, monitoring multiple sensor feeds, adapting to our terrain modifications, finding ways around our primary obstacles. These guys are top tier. Then it's time to show them what real preparation looks like. Initiate Thunder Run. Rachel's fingers flew across her controls. Across the farm, hidden systems activated. The ground itself seemed to come alive as years of careful engineering revealed their true purpose. "What is this?" Morrison demanded as the terrain shifted around his men. "What are you doing?" "Teaching you the difference between soldiers and farmers," Michael replied. "Soldiers think in tactics, farmers think in seasons, in years, in decades." Cooper's veterans struck from multiple directions, their movements perfectly coordinated with the changing landscape. Atlas's bark echoed from carefully placed speakers, creating a disorienting wall of sound that made tactical coordination almost impossible. "Sir," one of Morrison's commanders shouted, "we're losing cohesion. Every position we take becomes a trap." Morrison's response was immediate and violent. "Enough! Burn it all! Level every building, salt the earth!" His men deployed. Incendiary devices, but even this had been anticipated. The farm's irrigation system, modified far beyond its original purpose, activated. What seemed like water was actually a fire-suppressant foam, rendering their weapons useless. "You still don't understand," Michael's voice carried clearly across. "The chaos. This isn't a battlefield you've wandered onto. This entire farm is the weapon." Mia's voice cut in urgently. "Michael, thermal shows movement at the perimeter. They had a reserve force hidden in the valley, heavy weapons, serious hardware." "Right on schedule," Michael replied. "Rachel ready? Cooper's men are in position. Atlas standing by." Morrison must have heard something in Michael's tone. "What are you planning?" "Just giving you one last chance. Surrender now, walk away, or learn why some ghosts are best left alone." "Never." Morrison's voice was steel. "I've sacrificed too much. Built. Too much? This valley will be mine, or it will be ashes." "Wrong answer." Michael emerged from the shadows, every movement demonstrating decades of covert operations experience. "Mia, execute final protocol." The farm's last and most sophisticated defenses activated. Hidden bunkers opened, revealing intelligence gathering. Equipment that would make CIA teams envious. The killing ground transformed into its final form. "Now then," Michael said quietly, "let's finish the lesson about why you don't threaten a farmer who spent 20 years in intelligence operations." Morrison's response was a burst of automatic fire, but Michael was already moving. The final confrontation had begun, and the night was about to demonstrate why some quiet men have earned their peace through decades of preparation for violence. Farmland erupted into chaos as Morrison's elite forces engaged in direct combat. Their training showed in every movement, but they were fighting on terrain that had been prepared for 2 decades to counter exactly their type of tactics. "Spread out," Morrison commanded, his own intelligence expertise evident in his deployment. "4-man teams, overlapping fields of fire. Don't bunch up." "Good instincts," Michael commented from the darkness. "Standard counter-ambush protocol. Exactly what I'd expect from CIA training, and exactly why it won't work." "Every defensive position they're moving toward is a trap," Rachel added on their private channel. "Mia monitoring their communications?" Michael finished. "They're coordinating a 3-pronged assault, trying to overwhelm us with synchronized attacks." Morrison's forces moved with precision, each team covering the other's advance. Their night vision equipment swept the darkness, searching for threats, but Michael had spent years learning how to move unseen, and his farm had been designed to maximize that advantage. "Contact left," one of the team leaders shouted. But by the time they turned to fire, Michael was gone, leaving only unconscious bodies in his wake. "How is he doing this?" another commander demanded. "No one moves that fast." "He's not moving fast," Morrison replied, his voice tight with growing understanding. He's moving smart, using terrain he's memorized over decades. Rachel, status on the western approach? They're pushing hard, she reported. 3 teams moving in echelon, but they've just entered killing zone 4. Atlas's bark echoed across the property, but this time it was different. A specific pattern that Cooper's veterans recognized instantly. They opened fire from concealed positions, their shots precise and coordinated, not killing, but disabling with ruthless efficiency. "We're losing containment," Morrison's second-in-command reported. "Every position we take becomes a trap. Every route we try leads to another ambush." "Mia," Michael's voice cut through their private channel. "Status?" They're adapting again. Morrison is deploying his reserve forces. Different equipment loadout. These guys are carrying something new. Through his thermal scope, Michael watched. As the new teams deployed, their movement was different, more cautious. They carried specialized breaching equipment and what looked like electronic warfare gear. "They're trying to hack our systems," Rachel reported, her fingers flying across her control panel. "Advanced stuff too, military-grade decryption." "Let them try," Michael replied. "Show them why we kept the most important systems completely analog." The farm's defensive grid shifted again, but this time it wasn't through sophisticated electronics. Simple mechanical systems powered by water pressure, and gravity transformed the battlefield. Morrison's tech specialists found themselves trying to hack equipment that didn't have any electronics to compromise. Hey there, if you're enjoying this content and want to stay up to date with our latest releases, be sure to hit that subscribe button. By subscribing, you'll join our amazing community and never miss out on the exciting things we have in store. Plus, your support means the world to us and helps us keep creating the content you love. Thanks for being a part of our journey.